This is my first time changing out automotive tires at home. So I've assembled this toolkit: bead breaker, a set of tire spoons, some wheel weights, and a bubble balancer. There's a link in the description below for all these tools. So I'm going to give you a real world use review of this tools and this process from a fellow beginner standpoint to see what it's like and is this practical. The spoon kit also came with a valve wrench, so you can remove that from the valve stem and quickly let all the air out of your tire. See, I've got a piece of cardboard down. I'm going to try to minimize damage to the rim, which we should all try to do. So I'm going to do all the work from the back side of the rim. So if I dent or scratch the rim, it will be on the back side that's hidden. The first thing we need to do is break the bead. And this tool is pretty straightforward. The arm on there has a bolt that pushes it down against the inside of the rim and pulls it into place between the tire and the flange on the rim. See, I'm using a rag here to put between that arm, try to minimize any scratching. These wheels are from a Tesla Model Y. They are an aluminum alloy, but they're also painted, so trying to minimize any scratching on there. So just tightening up that arm, and it kind of pulls that foot in between the rim and the tire. I did lubricate it with some soapy water. It helps it get into place. And then you crank the main bolt on the top that pushes a foot down into the tire and pushes that bead off the rim. You can see I moved it around in 3 places here, but was pretty easily able to push the bead off the rim, and then you have to flip it over and repeat on the same side. But this tool was a pleasure to work with. It's not fast by any means. It takes a little bit of getting used to. And it was a bit of more challenge on the front side of the rim because the shape of this rim is a little bit different. So you can see there's a little bit of a groove in the rim between the spokes that the arm can fit in. And I just was kind of playing around with it here to see where that needed to be set and how tight I needed it to be to make it work. But what I found, putting the arm into that little machine groove in the rim and tightening it up good, pulled that foot right into place, and it worked pretty well and got this bead broken. Now that the beads are loose, we have to get that bead around that flange on the rim to pop it off. So these are the tire spoons. 3 of them come in the kit along with these rim protectors, the blue plastic piece you kind of clip on there. So I'm trying to get my bearings here, see how these are working. The spoon end, it's like a conventional tire iron, but the end of it's kind of flattened and much smaller. So it makes it easier to slip between the tire and the rim. And in that aspect, it worked pretty well. You can see I ditched the blue rim protectors. They're just too thick for an automotive tire to really work well. The other thing, these spoons probably work better on more of a motorcycle, ATV tires, thing like that. They are at their limit as far as prying strength on an automotive tire, but you can get it done with that. It takes a little bit of time. But all in all, with a little soapy water and those spoons, I was able to get the inside of the tire off the rim fairly easily. Now, that's where progress came to a crashing halt. Getting the outside bead of the tire over that inside of the rim proved to be a pretty good challenge for me with using these tire spoons. I could get it started, but then the rest of the tire was so tight against the rim, it was very difficult to get the next spoon in place or tire iron to get additional pieces of that bead to pop over the edge. So I wrestled with this thing for way longer than I probably should have. I don't know, probably over an hour. I was drenched with sweat. This became pretty frustrating. You can see I tried kneeling with the rim and tire assembly vertical. I tried standing and grunting and groaning, but the tire didn't seem to care. I tried the tire spoons from the outside. I tried them from the inside. Nothing seemed to work well. Like I said, I could get the bead like here, I could get it started over the lip, but I just couldn't get it to follow along. So I finally resorted to the Sawzall. And obviously you need to be extremely careful this. You don't want to nick the rim or anything like that. So I took it pretty carefully here. But first cut the tire to the bead or as close to the bead as I felt comfortable with the rim there, and was hoping that would provide enough flex in the overall tire that would assist me and make it a little bit easier to pop that bead over the rim flange. Still couldn't quite do it. So then I used the tire spoons to pry that bead away from the rim as much as possible, and use it also behind where I was cutting, so that if I went a little bit too far, I would hit that tire spoon and not the rim. There's a pretty significant steel cable that's embedded in the rubber. That's what gives the bead its structure. So once we got through those, we could simply peel the tire off the rim, and that makes removing it very easy. I wish I would have bailed on the spoons earlier and just cut it like this. One interesting thing to note, you can see that foam inside the tire. That's not on normal tires. This is an EV tire, and that's for quiet operation. Interesting little nugget there. Now onto the new tire. Just use some dish soap applied directly to the tire, provide a little longer lasting lubricant, and then wetted it down during the process with a nice spray bottle. Putting the new tire on the rim is a relatively straightforward process. Getting the first bead started is a little bit of manhandling, a few spoons to get it started. Then you can kind of use your body weight and pop the first bead over. Once that's down, you work on the second bead. Significantly easier than removing the tire. This set of tire spoons worked perfectly fine for that. And as you do this more and more, you'll get more practiced, and you won't tip over like me. But it did seem to help get the tire on. Then, last little bit, I was able to pop over, and bingo bango, the new tire is on the rim. The next thing we have to do is balance this tire. So here I've got the bubble balancer set up on a relatively flat part of the garage floor, and I'm making some minor adjustments in screws around the bubble level. So I'm just tightening or loosening a set of 3 screws up there to get the bubble in the middle before I put the rim and tire assembly on. Here's a close-up of what that bubble level looks like. You can see the bubble is in the middle of the black circle, and that's where we want it to be. Now you can make out a yellow dot on the outside sidewall of the tire in this picture here. And that is indicating at the tire manufacturer what the lightest part of the tire is. So theoretically that should be lined up with the valve stem, which is the lightest part of the tire lined up with the heaviest part of the wheel, so it should balance out the best there. So before I seat the bead and put air in the tire, I did a few iterations here where I tried to spin the tire on the wheel and get the balance as close as possible before adding any weight. Most of all, I found this to be relatively useless and didn't affect the balance of the entire assembly hardly at all. So before I added any weights, I decided to seat the bead and fill the air with tire. Then put it back on the balancer and finish the balancing. This is a pretty straightforward process, just adding air to your tire like you would. You need a air compressor to do this with a tank to quickly add some air. If you have a just kind of an on-demand battery operated one, might not be quite enough because the beads do leak slowly because they're not fully seated at this time. So you need kind of a quick rush of air into the tire, and it will actually move that bead, put it into place against the outer lips of the rim. You want to make sure to keep your fingers and anything out of that joint because that does snap into place very rapidly once you hit kind of a magic tire pressure along the way. In this case, this tire seated up very good with just going to the recommended operating pressure of 42 psi. In some cases, you might have to go a little bit above that and then back down to where you're at for the tire. Other times, the tires can be a little bit stubborn, and that leak by on the bead before it's seated is so much that you can't put enough air in there. In those scenarios, I'd recommend wrapping a ratchet strap around the outside of the tire. Tightening it up, that tends to put a little pressure on that bead and might just do the trick for you to get that bead seated. After inflation, I put back on the bubble balancer, and it did change the balance slightly, which makes sense. It moved the tire position on the rim. Still, the bubble was within the black circle, so the instructions of the bubble balancer say you add weight to get the bubble into the middle. I didn't have to add any weight to make that happen, but I still added a few weights just to get that bubble directly in the center of the balancer. And I picked up the wheel and turned it around a few times just to make sure it was seated properly and to try to remove any anomalies as much as possible. And ended up balancing out with just a couple small adhesive weights. In this video, I'm just doing the rear tires on Tesla Model Y. It is rear drive biased. It is an all-wheel drive vehicle, but it's rear biased, so the rear tires wear out much quicker than the front. So here we're on the second tire. I did purchase an additional longer tire iron from the automotive supply store. I thought that might help remove these beads off without having to cut the tire off the rim. It took a little bit of a learning curve here using it with the spoons, even to get the inside bead over the inside of the rim, but I eventually did. But then again, getting that second bead off over the rim proved to be still a challenge, even with this longer tire iron with a much more leverage. So I ended up aborting much sooner on this attempt than I did with the front tire after realizing it still wasn't enough to get it off, and went ahead and cut the tire off the rim again. This time though, I used the Sawzall reciprocating saw for the bulk of the tire, but then when I got to the bead, I used an angle grinder to finish that steel cable within there, and that went a little bit easier. A little more control too, without worrying about hitting the rim. Of course, once you do that, it's easy to peel the tire right off the rim. In the future, I may not even try to get that first bead off, just kind of push it down away from the rim, cut the tire, cut the bead, take it off just like that. Then I put my new tire on, inflated it, balanced it, just like I did the first tire. That process went pretty smooth. Put the tires back on the car, and my big unknown here, the installation process went very well. I don't have any concerns with the tire leaking or anything. Just the big unknown is how well did this balancer work. So I took it for a test drive out on the highway, did not notice any vibration from the new rear tires. They balanced out perfectly. So that passed the test. I was a little bit unsure about that.
Well, I'm not going to lie, it was a challenge. Clearly, I like to challenge myself. It's up to you if you want to challenge yourself. Thanks for watching. Adios.